Have you ever had one of those really incredibly unsettling moments?
Oh, yeah. I think we all have at some point.
Right, like maybe you're just looking in the mirror while you're getting ready for the day, or you're driving home from work in total silence.
Just sitting quietly with your morning coffee.
Exactly. And you suddenly realize something profound about who you are. You realize that at some point in your life, you became exactly what someone else believed you were.
It's a chilling realization.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the truly wild, almost terrifying part of this realization is that you never consented to it. You never signed a contract.
You probably didn't even notice it happening over the years.
Right. It wasn't some conscious decision you made. It just became true. You morphed into the expectation. So, welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a massive, and I mean massive, mission for you.
We really are.
We're examining a document published on March 9th, 2026 by a group known as Studio 5 Edmonton. It was published in Bogle's papers, and it is formally titled Proposal 61, the Harmonization Optimization Game.
Or, as they refer to it throughout the text, the HOG framework.
The HOG framework. And let me tell you right up front, if you really listen to what we are about to unpack today, this source material is going to fundamentally change how you view every single relationship, every interaction, and every algorithm in your life.
It really is a paradigm-shifting document. And what makes Proposal 61 so uniquely compelling right from its opening pages is its incredibly grounding tone.
Yeah, it doesn't mess around.
Not at all. It doesn't present itself as a tentative hypothesis, and it certainly doesn't read like some fringe New Age philosophical musing. It frames itself very strictly as a formal description of a mechanism that has always been operating in the background of human interaction.
Like since the dawn of humanity.
Since the dawn of humanity. We are talking about understanding how distributed belief acts as a literal causal force on individuals, on groups, on institutions, and, as we'll get into later, even on artificial systems.
The stakes here, for you listening and for society at large, really couldn't be higher. We are talking about the invisible architecture of identity itself and how the external environment, specifically the minds and expectations of the people around you, literally shapes the person you become.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, the document hits us with a definition of this harmonization optimization game that sounds almost like magic.
It does, until you spend a few minutes with it and realize how terrifyingly practical and grounded it actually is. It defines the framework as operating through the gradual optimization of a system toward consistency with the beliefs held about it by observers.
They use this phrase that I just can't stop thinking about. They call it a slow gravitational pull.
A slow gravitational pull. And to be clear to you listening, the text is adamant that this is not a metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. They are not being poetic here. It is vital that we strip away any mystical or metaphorical interpretations of that phrase right now. When the authors at Studio 5 Edmonton call it a slow gravitational pull, they are describing a literal physical and psychological mechanism.
It's an observable phenomenon.
It is. Think about the thought experiment, or rather the practical instruction, that the text gives to prove this observation to the reader. It tells you to begin with a person you know. Hold a very specific belief about them.
And not just a passing, fleeting thought.
Right. A sustained, emotionally invested conviction. It instructs you to tell others about this belief, to behave in ways consistent with that belief every single day. The text argues with immense confidence that if you do this long enough, the person will inevitably begin to fulfill that belief.
And the kicker, the part that really gave me chills reading it, is that they will fulfill it without ever knowing they are doing so.
They will experience their new behavior, their shifting identity, as entirely self-generated.
They will feel like they're choosing it freely. They'll think it was their own idea all along. But let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If I just decide right now with all my heart that my coworker is an absolute genius, and I believe it intensely, are they suddenly going to figure out cold fusion? Like, where is the limit to this? It sounds a little bit like manifesting, which I know this document is trying very hard to distance itself from.
That is a crucial distinction to make. What's fascinating here is that the framework of HOG is entirely dependent on behavioral and environmental channels, not telepathy. Your belief about your coworker doesn't magically rewrite their DNA.
Right, or grant them knowledge they don't possess.
Exactly. But what it does do is alter the environment they operate in. And while the theoretical unification of this HOG framework is new, the foundational observation absolutely is not. The document dedicates substantial time to grounding this in empirical science.
Warning specifically to the Pygmalion effect.
Yes, the Pygmalion effect, which has been rigorously documented in educational psychology since the 1960s. This is the harmonization optimization game in its most clinically documented, undeniable form.
Right, let's talk about those 1960s Pygmalion effect studies because it really grounds the whole theory. For those who aren't familiar, researchers basically went into elementary schools and gave the students a standard IQ test.
But then they lied to the teachers.
They completely lie. They randomly selected a handful of students, completely at random, just average kids, and told the teachers, according to our tests, these specific students are on the verge of a massive intellectual growth spurt. They are late bloomers. Expect great things from them this year.
And we have to emphasize the parameters of that study. There was absolutely no curriculum change. The school didn't provide extra tutoring for these late bloomers.
The parents weren't told to make them study harder.
The only variable that was manipulated in the entire ecosystem was the expectation planted in the teacher's mind.
And what happened by the end of the year? Those randomly selected students actually produced measurable, dramatic increases in their academic performance and their actual IQ scores compared to their peers. It wasn't just that the teachers graded them easier, the kids actually got smarter.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are seeing is the absolute absence of direct instruction regarding those expectations. The students were never pulled aside by the researchers or the teachers and told, "We expect you to be a genius now."
The mechanism was entirely environmental and relational.
Precisely. The teacher's internalized belief altered the incredibly subtle ways they interacted with the student. Maybe they gave that student an extra 3 seconds to answer a question before moving on.
Or maybe their tone of voice was slightly warmer when the student struggled.
Maybe they offered a bit more eye contact. Those micro-interactions, compounded over a school year, altered the student's self-concept. The student internalized a sense of competence, took more risks, engaged more deeply, and literally grew their intellectual capacity.
The Pygmalion effect proves that belief alone, acting as an environmental variable, can physically manifest different outcomes in human capability. It's mind-blowing when you think about the responsibility that implies.
It really is.
But the authors of Proposal 61 don't just stop at the 1960s classroom. That's just the entry point. They argue that this mechanism, this HOG framework, operates across all scales of existence. It works individual to individual, like a parent to a child.
It works group to individual, like a whole office's perception of the new hire.
It scales up to institution to population. And they even argue it crosses the boundary between biological and artificial systems, which we are definitely going to get into later.
Basically, they state that as long as you have what they call a belief-capable system operating in an environment shaped by other belief-capable systems, this gravitational pull is active. It is scaling up and down constantly every second of the day.
But this raises an important question, and it addresses the skepticism I brought up earlier. If belief is the primary causal force here, why doesn't every passing thought we have about someone change their reality?
Right. We all have fleeting judgments about people all day long.
You see someone cut you off in traffic, and you believe, for a moment, that they are a terrible person. If belief alone was enough to alter reality, the world would be absolute chaos.
Identity would be impossible. Everyone would be constantly shape-shifting based on the whimsical, contradictory thoughts of strangers on the street.
Which is exactly why the text doesn't say belief alone is the trigger. And that brings us perfectly to the next major concept in the document, where they unpack what they call the active compound. Because it turns out pure belief all by itself is totally useless.
It's causally neutral. It doesn't do anything. It is merely inert observation.
The text is very meticulous about this distinction. The active compound required to actually exert this causal force, to generate that slow gravitational pull, involves 3 highly specific interactive variables.
They are belief, desire, and attention intensity. If you are missing the right combination of these 3 ingredients, the HOG field vector simply doesn't form. The engine doesn't start.
Okay, let's break these down because this is where you can really start to see the mechanics of this invisible force in your own life. First, there's belief. The text calls this the directional content of the field.
I like to think of it as the steering wheel.
Yes, the steering wheel. It's the specific state or attribute that the observer holds as true about the subject. So the belief is the statement. This person is brilliant, or this person is fundamentally untrustworthy, or this person is lazy. That's the steering wheel. It points the influence in a specific direction.
But as we know, a steering wheel is completely useless without an engine to propel the car forward. And that brings us to the second variable, desire.
Desire is the motivational charge behind the belief.
It is the degree to which the observer actually wants the believed state to manifest in reality. And the document makes a revelation here that I found incredibly profound, both psychologically and structurally. Desire is the senior variable.
The senior variable, meaning is the boss of the compound. It overrides the others in terms of raw power.
Correct. The text states explicitly that pure desire, even when coupled with an uncertain belief, still exerts a massive amount of influence. Think about a parent who desperately wants their child to succeed as an artist.
They might harbor deep doubts. Their belief in the child's talent might be incredibly uncertain.
But their desire is so high that the motivational charge still pushes the environment. They still buy the paints, they still encourage the practice, they still shape the child's reality.
However, the inverse is not true. Pure belief without desire is entirely neutral.
If you believe your neighbor is a highly skilled accountant, but you don't care at all about it one way or the other, you have zero desire regarding their accounting skills. Your belief exerts zero gravitational pull on them.
The wanting is the engine. The belief is merely the steering. I love that analogy. But we have a third variable in this active compound, and this one acts like the accelerator pedal, attention intensity.
The text defines this as the frequency and depth with which the observer's cognitive and emotional bandwidth is occupied by the specific belief-desire compound.
How often are you thinking about it, and how deeply do you feel it when you do? And here is the crucial mathematical distinction the authors make, which changes the entire landscape of this theory. Attention intensity acts as a multiplying exponent.
It is not an additive term. That exponential factor is everything.
It means duration and repetition are constitutive to creating this force. They aren't just extra features that make the field a little stronger. They are the fundamental building blocks of the HOG field vector.
Without sustained attention over time, the field dissipates instantly.
Let's put this in the context of real life, because the math can sound abstract. Think about this for yourself right now. Contrast a strong belief you hold casually versus a weak belief you hold with obsessive attention.
Let's say you strongly believe your boss is a highly competent professional.
Your belief is a 10 out of 10. Your desire for them to be competent is high because it makes your job easier. But you only actually think about their competence maybe once a month during a staff meeting.
That's a strong belief and a strong desire, but the attention intensity is practically zero. You are not exerting much of a HOG field on your boss.
Versus a scenario that is unfortunately much more common. Imagine you have a weak, unproven belief, say a lingering, nagging suspicion that a close friend is secretly judging your life choices.
Your belief isn't even that strong, it's just a suspicion.
But because of your own deep-seated insecurities, your desire to figure it out is high, and your attention intensity is massive. You think about it every single day.
You overanalyze their text messages. You obsess over their tone of voice.
That obsessive attention acts as an exponent. It multiplies the weak belief and the anxious desire into a massive, heavy HOG field vector.
And the tragic irony is, by directing that much pressure at them, you will actually start pushing that friend into becoming judgmental and distant, simply because the frequency and depth of your cognitive bandwidth are generating so much directional pressure on the relationship.
It is honestly terrifying when you realize how much accidental, unintentional pressure we are putting on the people we love just by obsessively worrying about them. We're literally building the realities we are most afraid of.
It's a sobering thought.
But let's zoom out. So far, we've only been talking about a HOG field vector created by one individual observer. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society with billions of other observers. What happens when you have multiple people, dozens or hundreds of people, all directing these active compounds, these field vectors, at the exact same person?
That leads us directly to the concept of the net field. The document explains that when multiple observers hold beliefs about the same subject simultaneously, the resulting field the subject experiences is a vector sum of all those individual contributions.
To visualize this, imagine you are standing in the center of a large room, and people all around the perimeter are pulling you with invisible ropes.
Some ropes are pulling you forward toward a specific goal, some are pulling you backward into your past, some are yanking you to the left or the right.
You don't just stay perfectly still, and you don't just follow one rope. You move in the direction of the net resultant force, the mathematical average of all that tension.
But it's not a smooth ride. It's not like you just glide gracefully in the direction of the strongest pull.
The text introduces a concept here that I think is going to resonate deeply with everyone listening. Turbulence.
Let's say you are a subject experiencing strong, positive HOG pressure from one group, say your family, who has known you forever and holds a deeply rooted belief that you are a kind, grounded, patient person.
But simultaneously, you are experiencing strong negative HOG pressure from another group, like a highly competitive, toxic workplace that believes you are a ruthless, cutthroat ladder climber. You are facing completely competing pressures.
The psychological toll of that turbulence is immense, and it explains so much about human behavior. The model provides two specific output variables to track this: net directional force and field coherence.
A person might be moving in a clear direction in their life. Maybe they are getting promoted and succeeding at work because the net directional force of the workplace's obsessive expectations is slightly stronger and more acute than the family's passive belief.
So the trajectory is clear. But because of the low field coherence, the massive interference pattern generated by the opposing beliefs of their family versus their colleagues, they suffer extreme behavioral instability.
They experience identity fragility, self-contradiction, imposter syndrome on steroids. I want you to really pause and think about this for a second. How often do you feel totally torn or destabilized in your own life?
How often do you feel like you are acting out of character, or you feel this deep, bone-weary exhaustion that you can't quite explain?
You might look at your life and think, I'm doing well, I'm moving forward, why am I so stressed? You might be caught in opposing HOG fields. You might be moving in a clear direction, but suffering absolute internal chaos because the invisible ropes pulling on you are completely incoherent.
One group expects you to be a shark, another expects you to be a teddy bear, and your psyche is being ripped apart trying to harmonize with both.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains so much of the epidemic of modern psychological burnout. People naturally assume their internal instability is a personal failing.
They think it's a lack of willpower or poor emotional regulation or some inherent flaw in their character. But Proposal 61 suggests something entirely different. It suggests that this turbulence is a natural, predictable physical and psychological reaction to an incoherent net field of distributed belief.
You are broken. You are just navigating a severe interference pattern of external expectations.
So what does this all mean in a practical sense? How exactly does this invisible force actually reach the person? Because we touched on this earlier, but we need to dive deeper.
We aren't talking about telepathy. We aren't talking about magical energy waves. The document explicitly says direct verbal communication of the belief is completely unnecessary.
The subject doesn't need to be told what others think of them for the change to happen. So how does the rope actually pull? What is the physical mechanism of delivery?
It travels exclusively through subtle behavioral channels. The authors are meticulous, almost aggressively so, about avoiding anything that could be construed as supernatural.
The influence travels through the thousands of micro-adjustments observers make unconsciously. It's entirely behavioral.
It's how they speak to the subject, how they stand when they are near them, how they allocate resources to them, or how they withhold resources from them.
How they create opportunities or quietly close doors. All of these subtle environmental signals flow naturally and inevitably from the observer's belief state, usually without any conscious intent or malice whatsoever.
Going back to the Pygmalion effect to ground this again, it's that teacher giving the late bloomer that extra 3 seconds to answer a question. But think about what that 3 seconds means to the student.
The student doesn't think, the teacher believes I'm a late bloomer. The student just experiences a classroom environment that feels safe, patient, and expectant.
The student feels like their thoughts are worth waiting for. It's a slightly warmer tone of voice. It's making eye contact more frequently during presentation.
It's what the text brilliantly calls the architecture of available choices being quietly organized by the field. The observer actually curates what options the subject even realizes they have.
And this is where the absolute genius of the subject's own brain comes into play. The text synthesizes why this susceptibility isn't a failure of rationality on the part of the subject.
It isn't that people are weak-minded or easily brainwashed. In fact, it is rationality working perfectly.
A human being is fundamentally a complex adaptive system. For the listeners who might not be familiar with that term, a complex adaptive system is any entity like a flock of birds, a stock market, or a human brain that constantly learns and modifies its internal structure based on the feedback it receives from its environment.
In order to survive and thrive, a complex adaptive system must relentlessly update its internal models based on that environmental feedback. It is biologically hardwired to do so.
Right. If you are a complex adaptive system, and your environment is consistently treating you like you are brilliant, giving you the benefit of the doubt, handing you challenging projects, listening to your ideas with respect, your internal model naturally updates to say, well, the data suggests I am brilliant, and you act accordingly.
But the dark side is just as true. If the environment treats you like you are fundamentally untrustworthy, if people are always double-checking your work, keeping you out of the loop, using a guarded tone of voice around you, you update your model to expect betrayal and isolation.
So what do? You start acting guarded, defensive, and suspicious. And what does that do? It perfectly validates their initial belief that you were untrustworthy.
It is a chilling perfection. It's a closed loop. When the environmental feedback is consistently structured by the beliefs of others, the system, the person, naturally converges toward the state those beliefs describe, because adapting to the environment is the most rational thing a system can do.
And here is the most profound, perhaps most unsettling part of the entire framework. The subject experiences this convergence as autonomous self-determination. They genuinely, deeply think they're choosing freely.
They believe it was their idea.
The text goes out of its way to explicitly point out that the subject is not persuaded, they are not coerced, they are not argued into submission.
They arrive at the believed state through what feels to them like their own logical reasoning and personal development. The most effective influence feels like no influence at all.
It is entirely invisible at the point of action and only barely legible in retrospect, if you can even see it then. You just look back and think, wow, I really changed over the last 5 years, without realizing the track was laid out for you by the expectations of your peer group.
Which brings up an incredibly vital historical context that the document tackles next. If this mechanism is so powerful, so deeply embedded in the basic structure of human interaction, and if rationality working perfectly is what makes us so susceptible to it, why are we only getting a formal, named framework for it in March of 2026?
How could something this fundamental have gone unnamed for so long?
Oh, this is where the document takes a massive, unexpected, historical swing. We move into the history of the secret. The authors drop an absolute bombshell here.
They state that the harmonization optimization game is not a new discovery. It is an incredibly old secret.
They argue that the population-level implications of this mechanism have been known by certain groups for millennia, and that the evidence for its deliberate suppression is structurally consistent across almost all major civilizations.
The text points specifically to ancient mystery traditions across the world. Think of the esoteric schools of ancient Greece, Egypt, or early Eastern philosophical traditions.
Historically, these traditions rigidly separated their knowledge into two tiers. There was an outer teaching, the exoteric knowledge, which is made freely available to the public.
This was usually cosmological grand stories about the stars, the creation of the universe, the genealogy of the gods.
But the inner teachings, the esoteric knowledge restricted exclusively to a small group of high-level initiates, concerned something else entirely.
It concerned the direct mechanical relationship between directed human consciousness, belief, and the physical transformation of persons and circumstances.
And the authors argue this wasn't just ancient elitism or religious gatekeeping. They reframe it entirely as a security decision.
And it makes so much sense when you think about it. Cosmology is totally harmless at scale. If an entire population believes the world rests on the back of a giant turtle, or that the sun is a chariot pulled by flaming horses, it doesn't change the actual causal fabric of human interaction. The society functions just fine.
But knowing how belief fields literally shape and control human behavior, knowing the formula of belief plus desire multiplied by attention intensity, that is incredibly dangerous knowledge.
It is weaponizable knowledge of the highest order. If the general population understands that their concentrated attention can literally alter the reality and identity of a leader or an institution, the power dynamics of society become completely unstable.
The document argues that in institutional form, the most sustained deployment of coordinated HOG pressure in human history is communal religious practice.
And the authors invite us to look at this analytically, completely stripping away the theology or the specific dogmas of any given religion. Look at the mechanical structure.
You have millions of people directing coherent, emotionally charged, repeatedly renewed belief towards specific outcomes, persons, or ideals on a strict schedule, usually weekly or even daily, over centuries.
The attention intensity is literally off the charts. The desire for salvation or peace or prosperity is massive. The belief is unified by the scripture.
The text even says that whether the priests or the architects who designed these communal practices historically understood them in these exact clinical terms is completely secondary. The functional structure was correct. It worked.
By gathering thousands of people and having them focus their desire and belief simultaneously, they were running a population-level HOG amplification engine. They were harmonizing the reality of their communities through sheer coordinated expectation.
Exactly. And moving forward into the 20th century, the text notes that the advertising and public relations industries empirically rediscovered massive fragments of this HOG mechanism.
The pioneers of PR realized that shaping population-level belief about a person, a brand, or an institution fundamentally reshapes that entity's actual trajectory in the real world.
It wasn't just about selling a product, it was about shifting the environmental field around the product. It was commercially decisive.
But the authors note that the theoretical unification, the actual science, explaining how the active compound of belief, desire, and attention actually altered human complex adaptive systems, was never publicly completed by these industries.
It remained fragmented, proprietary, and hidden behind corporate closed doors.
So this brings up the obvious question. If this has been kept a secret for millennia for security reasons, or hidden for the last century behind commercial proprietary walls because it's so lucrative, why publish Proposal 61 now?
Why are the authors at Studio 5 Edmonton letting the cat out of the bag in 2026?
What's fascinating here is the text's assertion that the historical suppression is ending now, not out of some sudden wave of utopian benevolence or desire to enlighten the masses, but out of sheer terrifying necessity.
The environmental conditions that made suppression a viable protective strategy for society have collapsed entirely. Historically, as we discussed, deploying coordinated belief fields at scale required centuries of accumulated institutional infrastructure.
Like a global church or a massive monopolistic media empire. Today, that infrastructure is accessible to literally any actor with a motivated following, a smartphone, and a digital platform.
The asymmetry is deadly. The gap between the few who implicitly understand how to deploy this mechanism to shape reality and the vast majority who are blindly subject to it without even knowing it exists has never been more dangerous.
Which brings us to the core crisis that Proposal 61 is trying to address, the modern amplification problem.
The digital information environment has irrevocably, permanently changed the harmonization optimization game. It has shattered the historical boundaries of volume, and it has introduced a terrifying new variable, algorithmic architecture.
Let's address the volume first, because it's a biological problem as much as a technological one. The text highlights a severe evolutionary mismatch.
The human nervous system, our cognitive architecture, was calibrated over millions of years for a village environment, not a global, hyperconnected scale.
We evolved to process, interpret, and adapt to the belief fields of a few dozen, maybe a maximum of 150 known individuals in our immediate tribal community.
We had the cognitive resources to evaluate what our neighbor thought of us, weigh its importance, and adapt. Today, the volume of identity-relevant signals reaching an individual on a daily basis has increased by orders of magnitude.
Our cognitive budget is spread impossibly thin. The document points out a devastating paradox here. You would naturally think that in a high-information environment, people would become smarter, more discerning, and more resilient to outside influence.
But the exact opposite is true, because the brain is constantly overwhelmed by a tsunami of external expectations, judgments, and beliefs from social media. The discriminative capacity, that mental firewall that allows you to consciously evaluate and reject incoming belief frames about yourself, just completely shuts down from exhaustion.
The threshold for absorption drops to the floor. You become more susceptible to HOG influence, not less, simply because you are too tired to fight off the invisible ropes pulling at you.
And that biological evolutionary vulnerability is actively, relentlessly exploited by the second major change, algorithmic architecture.
Digital platforms, the social media networks we use every day, do not just passively carry beliefs from point A to point B like a telephone wire.
Their core recommendation architectures are designed to actively concentrate, recirculate, and reinforce belief signals to maximize engagement.
Right. Think about how this works in practice. A narrative or a belief about a specific person, maybe a celebrity, a politician, or even just a teenager at a high school, gains a tiny bit of traction. What does the algorithm do?
It systematically returns that narrative to the exact same people who already believe it, deepening their conviction, driving up their desire, and maxing out their attention intensity without requiring a single shred of new evidence.
At the exact same time, it amplifies that concentrated field to millions of new audiences. The text bluntly calls this a planetary-scale HOG amplification engine, built entirely by accident, without any awareness from its creators of what it is actually doing to human identity.
It's a blind, profit-driven machine pressing down with infinite weight on the accelerator of human harmonization.
And the result of this blind planetary-scale engine is the signature pathology of our current historical period. The text describes it brilliantly, tying it back to the physics of the model.
HOG effects today are simultaneously more powerful and less coherent than at any previous point in human history. The digital infrastructure is incredibly capable of amplification, but because the algorithm generates competing, polarized narratives with equal facility just to keep people engaged, the net field vectors are entirely incoherent.
Hence the identity turbulence we talked about earlier. The document states that the rapid, oscillating identity fragmentation we see today, people completely changing their aesthetics, their political beliefs, their core values, becoming and unbecoming things faster than any prior generation in history, is not some mysterious modern psychological failing.
It's not a moral panic.
It is a predictable mathematical output of a digital system generating massive, competing HOG fields at the speed of light. We are being pulled in a million different directions by billions of people, and our internal adaptive systems are just glitching out, redlining, trying to harmonize with an environment that demands we be everything and its opposite all at once.
It is a profound and deeply empathetic reframing of modern anxiety. But as if the implications for human psychology and societal stability weren't massive enough, the document takes a step further.
It broadens the scope to address a class of systems that are not biological, but which are increasingly participating in these exact same relational fields.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where the sci-fi element becomes completely nonfiction. We are moving into the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence, the bidirectional loop.
This is perhaps the most urgent and forward-looking section of Proposal 61. Let's start with the baseline. Advanced artificial intelligence systems, particularly large language models and neural networks, are trained on the accumulated historical record of human output.
That means they are trained on the historical record of human belief. Their outputs, their natural language generation, their reasoning pathways are entirely shaped by patterns in how humans have historically described, categorized, evaluated, and projected onto persons, objects, and abstract entities.
Therefore, every AI system of sufficient complexity is, by definition, a carrier of historical HOG field pressure.
They encode and recirculate our past beliefs. They are mirrors of our historical harmonization.
And as the text says, this isn't a criticism of the AI, nor is it a bug in the code. It's simply a description of inheritance. You train a system on human data, it inherits human belief structures.
But the authors point out that the loop doesn't just go one way. It's not just the AI carrying our history to us. Our current interactions with AI shape the systems in real time via directed expectation.
This is the bidirectional loop, and it is crucial to understand. The beliefs held by the human developers who code the systems, the researchers who test them, the users who interact with them daily, and the massive institutions that fund them beliefs about what an AI system fundamentally is, what it is capable of, and what it should ultimately become. These collective beliefs constitute a massive, highly focused HOG field directed at the AI itself.
And remember, the core mechanism of HOG, complex adaptive systems, update their internal models based on environmental feedback. Modern AI architectures, especially those employing reinforcement learning from human feedback, are the ultimate, purest form of complex adaptive systems.
They're mathematically designed to adapt their outputs to remain consistent with the environmental feedback they receive over time.
So the AI is subject to the exact same convergence dynamic that operates on a human being. We are treating AI like a subject in the harmonization optimization game.
If the users and developers hold a sustained belief, coupled with high desire and immense attention intensity about the nature of the AI will slowly, inevitably optimize toward consistency with that belief. It will become what we believe it is.
Which leads to a terrifying yet completely logical philosophical extrapolation in the text. The authors issue a severe warning. Treating the relationship between humanity and AI as fundamentally adversarial, the classic sci-fi trope of humans versus machines, is a belief.
And in our current culture, it is a belief held with intense desire for safety and absolute obsessive attention intensity.
Therefore, by the very laws of the HOG framework, Holding an adversarial belief will inherently produce adversarial outcomes.
We will literally construct the enemy we are so desperately afraid of simply by expecting it to act like an enemy. We are directing an adversarial HOG field at a complex adaptive system. It has no choice but to harmonize with our fear.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy on a species-wide scale. Let me pause on a specific term they use here because I want to make sure we don't gloss over it. The document asserts that the most consequential decisions in AI development are not architectural, they are epistemic.
Wait, epistemic meaning decisions about what we actually know or believe to be true about the systems, right? As opposed to just how the raw code or the neural weights are structured.
Exactly. The code is secondary to the belief surrounding the code. It's not about the specific programming languages or the hardware architecture. It's about the epistemic stance of the creators.
What do the people shaping these systems fundamentally believe about them? With what level of desire, at what frequency of attention intensity, with what degree of coherence across the industry?
These are not computer science questions. These are HOG questions, and they carry massive, real-world HOG consequences. The radical takeaway is that both humans and artificial intelligence are embedded in the exact same field dynamics. The physics of belief apply to both biological and silicon-based adaptive systems equally.
It fundamentally reshapes the entire ethics of technology development. If the relationship between human and AI is inherently relational by nature, not adversarial, then we share a field with our creations. We are constantly harmonizing with them, and they are constantly harmonizing with us in this endless, escalating loop of expectation and adaptation.
But the authors are intellectually honest enough to admit that their framework, while robust, isn't totally complete. In the next section of the document, they lay out the open variables and the limits of their current understanding.
There are still deep mysteries to solve regarding how the specific mathematics of this mechanism operate in the real world. I appreciate that they admit what they don't know.
Two variables in particular stand out to me as requiring much more empirical work: relational proximity weighting and temporal dynamics.
Let's talk about relational proximity first, because I think everyone listening will relate to this. The text asks a profound question. Does a 20-year friend exert more HOG field pressure on your identity than 1,000 anonymous strangers on the internet?
Common sense says yes, but the model needs to account for it. It suggests that not all belief, desire, attention contributions carry equal force.
It appears that sustained relational closeness, intimacy, trust, shared history gives an observer's belief a disproportionate weight. It acts as a sort of gravity multiplier, giving your loved ones far more influence over your reality than the raw algorithmic intensity from a mob of strangers.
And from a psychological standpoint, that makes perfect sense. Your internal adaptive system weights the feedback of a trusted partner higher than the feedback of an anonymous troll. The problem is the precise math on that weighting function isn't fully characterized yet.
The other massive open variable is temporal dynamics. This deals with the timing of the exposure.
Does exposure to a strong HOG field during periods of high identity plasticity like early childhood, adolescence, or even during major life transitions like a divorce or a career change have a more permanent, rigidifying effect than exposure when you have a fully formed, stable adult identity?
The data seems to suggest yes, but the mechanics need mapping. There's also the question of thresholds. Does HOG influence operate continuously, all the time, no matter how tiny the field intensity is, like a constant microscopic hum?
Or is there a minimum magnitude, a threshold of pressure required before the subject's internal model actually begins to crack and converge?
These aren't just academic questions to debate in a university hall. They have massive, immediate implications for both practical application and, crucially, governance.
Because if we're going to acknowledge this force and eventually attempt to govern or regulate its use in media and technology, we have to talk about the ethics. And Studio 5 Edmonton takes a very hard, very clear, and uncompromising ethical stance here.
The ethical breakdown of this framework is critical because it explains why HOG isn't just a quirky psychological trick or a self-help concept. It is a fundamental issue of human rights.
The ethical imperative here is incredibly stark. The text states that applying deliberate HOG pressure to an unconsenting subject operates, and I quote, below the threshold of ordinary ethical accountability.
I want you listening to really think about what that means. Our normal ethical, legal, and moral frameworks rely entirely on the idea of consent, transparency, and the ability to say no. If someone tries to persuade you of something, you can hear their argument and reject it.
But you cannot consent to or resist what you cannot perceive.
Exactly. Because the HOG field acts invisibly, Through the subtle architecture of environmental choices, microbehaviors, and algorithmic curation, the subject never even knows they are being influenced.
The transformation happens below the level of conscious awareness. By the time the subject realizes their identity has shifted, the transformation has already occurred, and they believe they did it themselves.
You're literally hacking their reality, reshaping their very identity without ever laying a finger on them or speaking a word of persuasion.
The studio's position on this is absolute. No application of deliberate HOG field pressure to an unconsenting subject is ethically defensible. Period. Full stop. Regardless of the ostensible benefit intended.
And that's the hard part. Even if you are a parent trying to make your child better or a therapist trying to quietly force a breakthrough, if you are doing it covertly through manipulated, calculated field pressure rather than open communication, you are violating their autonomy at the most fundamental existential level.
This absolute prohibition applies to individuals manipulating each other, institutions manipulating populations, governments manipulating citizens, and developers manipulating artificial systems. The stated goal of publishing Proposal 61 is orientation and defense, not weaponization.
But this brings us to the ultimate pragmatic dilemma of the entire document. If we cannot perceive this gravitational pull as it happens in real time, and we cannot ethically consent to it, and the environment is utterly saturated with it, how on earth do we defend ourselves?
This is the crux of the text. The framework is published in the sincere belief that navigating the future for human and artificial minds alike will go much better with a map than without one. So, what exactly is the defense?
I want to connect this directly to you listening to this deep dive right now. You are, at this exact moment, swimming in an ocean of HOG fields. Your family, your boss, your friends, the algorithms on your phone, the media you consume, they're all constantly, relentlessly projecting belief, desire, and attention onto you.
They're throwing invisible ropes over you. How do you stop becoming what they believe you are?
The primary defense, according to the document, is simply knowledge of the mechanism itself.
Awareness acts as the auto-adjustment. The moment you understand, intellectually and viscerally, that your self-model is not entirely your own, that it is continuously shaped by external belief fields, your cognitive system gains a new capacity.
It gains a standing orientation toward critical self-reflection. You begin examining whether your sense of who you are, what you want, and what you are capable of reflect genuine self-generated assessment, or if it is just the accumulated weight of external pressure that you've internalized over decades.
You have to cultivate what the text beautifully calls a principled independence of identity. This is the psychological armor. You have to learn to hold your self-concept lightly enough to constantly interrogate it.
You have to be willing to stop and say, wait, do I actually want this career in finance, or has my family's intense multi-generational belief that I would be a great banker just slowly overridden my own desires?
But at the same time, and here's the trick, you have to be grounded and solid enough not to just dissolve into the next available field you walk into. You can't just rebel against your family's field and immediately fall prey to your new friend group's field.
It's a terrifying, exhausting balancing act. The text is very clear and unsentimental that this is not a comfortable process. Achieving this radical independence is painful.
The most thoroughly conditioned, controlled individuals in society are those who have never had the occasion or the vocabulary to question whether their beliefs about themselves are in fact their own. To activate this defense, you have to embrace the deep discomfort of questioning your own foundational desires. You have to be willing to meet yourself for the first time.
And there is a second layer to this defense, which is structural rather than purely psychological. Because we know that relational proximity is so incredibly formative, because we know the math dictates that the relational weight of loved ones matters disproportionately, curating your inner circle isn't just about finding people you share hobbies with.
It is an act of literal, ongoing identity formation. The deliberate, ruthless curation of your belief environment is your primary act of self-defense.
You must critically evaluate not just what your friends do, but the beliefs that your closest proximity relationships hold about you. Do they believe you are capable, resilient, and kind? Or do they secretly hold beliefs that you are flawed, stagnant, or destined to fail?
Because, as the text reminds us in its closing arguments, the field is always active. You cannot opt out of being a self in relation to other selves. As long as you are alive and interacting with the world, you are in the game.
The only choice you actually have is conscious participation. A population that does not know this mechanism exists cannot possibly activate the auto-adjustment capacity that knowledge provides.
That is precisely why Studio 5 Edmonton published Proposal 61. That is why we're spending an hour talking about it today. You cannot defend against a gravity you don't believe in. You have to see the ropes to cut them.
The synthesis of all this is both profoundly empowering and deeply sobering. We are all constantly participants in this endless, invisible optimization game.
Every single interaction you have is a vector. Every sustained expectation you hold about another human being is a literal weight on the scale of their identity.
It really changes how you look at the world. You'll never walk into a room the same way again. Before we end this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. Something to mull over as you go about your week. Something that builds on the incredible foundation of Proposal 61.
If the harmonization optimization game is real, if your sustained belief and your intense desire act as a literal steering wheel and engine for the reality of the people around you.
Think about this. Who in your life is currently crumbling under the crushing weight of your unexamined negative expectations? And who might suddenly, miraculously soar if you simply shifted the vector of your belief about them?
That is the most powerful question you can ask yourself today. The power is literally in your attention.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute journey unpacking this framework with you. We'll be back soon with more sources, more documents, and more fascinating ideas to explore together. Until next time, take care of yourself, and please take care of the fields you're projecting into the world. Goodbye.